Well, hey friends, it's Jill. Welcome. I'm going to be sharing some new materials with you. I was contacted by the Meeden company, and you've probably seen some of their advertisements on Facebook and Instagram and that type of thing. They contacted me to ask if I would review and sort of just experiment with some of their materials just to see what I thought about it and to share with my audience. And so I'm going to be doing that now. And so let's take a look at what I've actually got to unbox for you and start working with today. Okay, so I have this little box that comes. There is a watercolor kit, okay, that actually comes from Meeden. They've got the whole thing sort of all packaged together, and I'm going to kind of go through this just to show you what's in here, and then we're going to get into sort of using some of these materials, and I can share my thoughts with you on how some of these things perform and what recommendations I might have. So there's a little porcelain palette that comes in here, and it's really nice weight. Well made, it's smooth, got a really nice surface, but it's just sort of a real standard, little flower shape. And I'll be honest with you in saying that this is not the style of palette that I use. I like to have a really large mixing area, but this palette it's really nice. It's heavy. It's not glazed on the bottom so that it doesn't scoot around, and then all of the little wells are nicely glazed and very smooth and would serve you well, okay? If you don't really use a mixing area that often, or if you kind of just use the same colors over and over that you're mixing and could use them for this, this would be a good palette for you. It's definitely good quality, but I'll be honest in that it's not the type of palette that I typically go for, just because I do need that bigger mixing area. It also comes with some watercolor brushes. And there are 10 brushes in here, and I'll kind of go over this with you just a little bit. There are 3 flat brushes, and let's see, there's 6 round brushes, and then a little fan brush. Now I've used some of these already, and the really smaller brushes I won't tend to use, but the larger brushes, they've really not been that bad. You'll see me demonstrate with this a little bit later, but these are not super high quality brushes, okay? I can tell that if you look closely at the ferrules have not been crimped, and that type of thing. And I'm not sure if these are wooden or plastic handles. It's kind of hard to tell because there's a thick layer of paint, it seems, on the outside. But in my experience with using the round and flat brushes so far, they deliver an okay amount of pigment. Okay, I'll get into that a little bit more, but just kind of talking about the quality of the brushes right now, it's an inexpensive brush, okay, but I think it does have some usage, especially if you're just starting out and not wanting to spend a great deal of money on some brushes. But let's take a look at this flat brush. I actually kind of enjoyed using this one. I'll get into it a little bit more, but there's a lot of volume, okay, in this flat brush, which allows me to deliver a lot more water and pigment, but still, again, more of a, it's kind of an inexpensive brush, no crimping for the ferrules, and basically what that means is that all of the brush has been assembled and put together just by glue only, and there's no crimping that I see that's visible. And that just means that you're, if you're in the habit of kind of dunking your, taking your water and you just leave your brushes in the water like that, it's not a really good habit to have, but you definitely would not want to do that with these brushes. They would not survive very long without that crimped ferrule. So we'll take a look at the brushes a little bit more in depth in another little demo. You also get some watercolor paper. The kit comes with 20 sheets of 140-pound cold press cotton, 100% cotton paper, and I'll go ahead and tell you I've had some really interesting results with this paper and kind of like it. Okay, we'll get into a little bit more on why and what that looks like when we get into our demo. The Meeden company was also nice enough. I requested some hot press paper as well, just so that I could test that out. Just know that the hot press paper doesn't come in the kit when you buy it. Okay, it comes with the cold press paper, but we'll get into that. And then you also get this, it's pretty sizable, okay, a set of 24 pigments, okay, and these are tube colors. And I'm going to go ahead and open this one up. You can see they're in here, all the tubes arranged in here, and if you'll look closely at the tubes, all the colors are listed there, and even if you're not familiar with the color, the pigment ID number is there, you know, in case you need it that way. And so it's pretty impressive to see this many colors in one, you know, in one set of one set of paints here. But you know, the paints are really inexpensive, and so it kind of makes you think, you know, I don't know. I'm not really sure how this is going to work, but we're going to dig into this, and I'm going to compare these, especially some of my favorite colors, with, for instance, like a Daniel Smith, you know, the same color in Daniel Smith, just to see how they perform, how they behave, and we'll just kind of test these out and see how they go. So let's get into it. All right, so let's get into this cold press paper. It is a really nice block of cold press paper. There are 20 sheets in here, and for the price, you know, it's really not a bad price at all for some 100% cotton cold press paper, which is definitely what you want to be using as a watercolor artist, regardless of your skill level. Okay, do not try to learn how to watercolor paint on just cellulose paper. Creates a lot of bad habits, a lot of frustrations, and all the rest that goes along with that. Always use some 100% cotton paper for that. So it does come in a block, and if you're new to that, that basically means that all the sheets are stacked one on top of the other, and they're bound on all of the edges with, you know, some sort of with a glue binder that keeps it in place. I don't typically work with a block, and the whole purpose or the objective behind a block is that the pages are sort of, they're pre-stretched, if you will, so they're already bound on all the edges so that you can start to paint, and your paper will lie pretty much relatively flat and then will dry flat if you leave it in the block to continue drying. I prefer to have loose sheets that I actually tape to a board, which is what I'm going to do for our demo here. But I thought this would be a good opportunity to show you how to kind of get into a block and how to remove the sheets. Okay, get into this. And so to start working with taking a block apart, you kind of have to use your fingernails, or either, you know, getting a little tool like this, you know, just like a palette knife, and don't try to just rip these off. You have to cut them off. So if you'll sort of, you've always got this little open spot at the top, so if you'll stick your palette knife in there and then just go across, you know, it will, you know, just slowly, it will cut that adhesive, you know, on both sides. I'm gonna put this down just so that you can kind of see it. I like to sort of come around the edge and then just stop. And this is for any size block. Even if I have the block, I'm not really going to paint on it as a block. You can, and you're kind of supposed to, but I like to just have a loose sheet, because once I start a painting, I might want to start another one right away before this one has time to dry, but I'm stuck with waiting on it to dry. So then after I cut the two sides, I just sort of fold this toward myself, and then this pretty much will tear away just like a sheet of paper out of a notebook. Okay, so there's my loose sheet. So, you know, if I'm, you know, intending to use this block, I will probably go through, tear all the sheets down so that I've got all the loose sheets, 20 loose sheets. Okay, all right. So when I opened it up and actually started kind of having like just to feel the paper, I really liked the feel, the texture. And then, you know, here's a piece of arches, and you know, if I put the two pieces together, you know, we've still got a very similar color quality. The Meeden paper may be a little bit brighter, and this is the natural arches, not the bright white. But the feel and the texture are very, very similar. And so that was my first insight that maybe this paper might have something to offer us. And we'll tape it down, and then let's just do a little intuitive demo and just see what happens. Okay, so I've went ahead and taped down my paper here onto my board, and I've just sort of squeezed out a few colors here just to kind of get started. And as I go, I might add some more colors, but I've put out a burnt sienna, an ultramarine blue, a cerulean blue. This is what they're calling a deep green, but it kind of looks like sap green, you know, something to that effect. And then also there's a pale yellow, which kind of looks like a cad yellow. And so we're just going to kind of start with that. I'm going to kind of just play and do a landscape. I will tell you that as I'm squeezing the colors out, I could feel that they're not quite as dense and heavy, heavy bodied as maybe a Daniel Smith color. But let's just see what they do. All right, we'll kind of talk about the differences in the pigments as we go, just to sort of, you know, kind of understand why they're so different, why maybe they're so, you know, so much less expensive than Daniel Smith or Winsor Newton. So I'm going to actually paint with the Meeden brushes too. I kind of like this flat brush just for size, because I do paint with a larger brush. I paint with a number 12 round Kolinsky, and so I'm just going to just do this entire thing just using the materials that are in the kit. This is the cerulean blue, and as I notice when I first get into the wash here, I'm just making a little bit of a sky here. It's giving me, you know, of course I'm working with a really light value, so it's kind of going into the paper nicely, sitting nicely on the paper. I'm getting some nice effects. You know, the pigment is moving on the paper a lot like I would expect with some Arches paper. It's moving, it's biting into the paper, and then also moving on the paper depending on how wet I have actually, you know, how I've got it. I'm going to just try to push the color a little bit just to see how, you know, how deep this color can be here. It's a little bit heavy for some of this blue sky, but I just want to push the color a little bit just to see. I can see that as I start to add more water, more pigment, the saturation capacity for the paper it's pretty small. It stops absorbing after a little bit. It's not like the Arches where it'll just keep taking on the pigment. It'll keep taking on the water. There's a point where it just sort of says, I've had enough, I'm not taking any more. And so that makes it a little bit more difficult to paint with a heavier amount of water. You can see how much it's wanting to bead up. It's not really wanting to go down into the paper. So that's kind of interesting. But I just want to kind of play with this a little bit more and see what else I can do, see what else I learn as I start working through. So I'm actually blotting a little bit to see if I can get some lift on the paper. And it does lift okay. I can do a little scrubbing, and the paper seems to take that pretty well. It's not pilling like you would normally see with a cellulose, you know, with a wood pulp type paper. It's just kind of going on there, but the amount of movement and absorption is a little bit limited as compared to Arches. All right, so what I learned with that is that I could probably just, you know, go easy on the amount of pigment that I'm adding. This is what I'm looking at in terms of being like a sap green. It does have a lot of blue in it, but I'm just going to kind of play and keep working here. Just sort of making up an imagined landscape. This is my Quin Sienna, or I'm sorry, here I go teaching. This is my burnt sienna. Those of you that know me, I use Quin Sienna quite a bit. So this is just the burnt sienna. I'm just playing with it and adding it. I kind of want to see how the colors mix on the paper as well as just, you know, over here on a mixing area. You can see why the little cloverleaf palette doesn't fit what I do very much, just because I'm constantly mixing and needing a large area to mix. All right, so I'm just kind of playing, just sort of doing something intuitive. I don't know, I'm just playing. We've been out west a lot last year and back in Georgia, about to head out there again. So I'm already starting to think about evergreens again and cooler temperatures. And so I'm just going to kind of play with these colors and just see what happens. I just want to see how they behave in this wet on wet environment, and then also how they kind of behave when I start getting into a dry section of the paper. I'm noticing that it's taking a fair amount of pigment to kind of mix and push far enough to get a heavier concentration or a darker, deeper value. And that's going to be in part because, you know, a lesser expensive watercolor is just not going to have the same amount of pigment. The amount of pigment is sacrificed, you know, for filler, honestly, and that is what makes the paints so much cheaper and that type of thing. But if you're having to use a lot of paint, then you wind up often having a painting that's a little bit overworked because you've had to use so much to get the same effects. I'm struggling with it right now in terms of building a really deep value. I'm having to really push the pigment to get a dark value, to get a nice coverage. All right, but I'm just going to keep going here. So I'm just kind of playing with this little flat brush. And just kind of seeing what happens. I will tell you that I am actually seeing some granulation with this ultramarine blue that's in the kit. Ultramarine blue is well known for its ability to granulate and give us a lot of interesting textures, and I'm seeing that happen here in this blue. So I'm just going to keep going. You can see I've had to really add a lot of pigment, get really heavy with the pigment to get some of these darker values that I probably would not have had to do, you know, if I was using my Daniel Smith. But let's just keep playing. Let's see what happens. So the yellow is really nice. It's giving me a lot of coverage. You know, cad yellow is one of those sort of semi-transparent colors, and I'm able to kind of lay it over the top of some of these others. And that's nice to see that it's willing to just kind of get in there and sit on top of the other colors. That's actually pretty nice. I can tell you right now, just with this small amount of painting that I have done right here, if you've used Winsor Newton Cotman colors, they're Winsor Newton's answer to a lesser student grade, entry level sort of pigment. There's a lot more pigment in these Meeden colors than I'm seeing in the Cotman color. So that there's something to be said for that. The Cotman colors just they just don't have enough pigment. And for the price, they should have pigment. Even if they are entry-level colors, they're still priced well above the Meeden colors here. All right, so I'm just kind of playing with my painting a little bit. I've got a little bit of that water, like we talked about. It's kind of not, the paper gets saturated pretty quickly. It gives up and says, I can't absorb any more, please stop. And so with that, because I've added a little bit more, as much water as I'm used to adding with my Arches paper, this one's kind of rejecting it, so I'm having to mop up just a little bit. But I'm just kind of going back over. But look at the saturation. Let's take a look at what's going on here. We've got some nice granulation happening. There's actually a little bit of blooming happening in here. The yellows are sitting up on top really nicely. And then when I put the heavy color on, it's really staying in place, even in the wet on wet. It's doing well right there. I'm going to kind of play a little bit in this area, kind of actually taking a little bit of a departure just to kind of pay attention to some compositional things that are starting to form here. I've got sort of a stain on the paper just because I had a big puddle sort of form and kind of lock in tight there, so I thought, let me try to just add another little something tree-ish in here. You can see that I do mix my color a lot, and that's why I really like having a big mixing area off to the side. Let's get into some of this yellow. This is just on dry paper. I want to kind of see how this likes to behave with the dry paper. When you put a watercolor onto dry paper, that's when you know how well the color's going to just sort of bite and grab hold of the paper. And the yellow's going in there pretty well. I don't have it overly diluted. I'm having to already sort of recalibrate a little bit and make sure that I don't put too much water into these pigments, because they'll thin, they'll dilute a little easier just because they don't have quite as much pigment. So I want to be careful not to over dilute. Alright, I'm just kind of playing here. This is some more of that cerulean. I have to say, for a really inexpensive pigment, this is giving me some nice coverage. Some things that, some lessons that I learned early was they don't like to lift very well, but that's probably just because of the paper. The paper does have some limitations in terms of absorption. And once it kind of bites into the paper, it's not wanting to scrub out quite as easily. Let's see. Orange is an interesting color to try because orange, it's one of those colors that everybody kind of, it's easy to cheat on orange. It looks bright in the tube, but once you put it on the paper, if you're really not committed to having some pigment in there, it just kind of gets washed out. So let's see what this orange does. So I'm just switching over to this round brush. These brushes are not numbered as per size. They're just, you just sort of have to look at the one you want and sort of pick it out and see what you think. But this would probably be what I would call a number 8 round. And the bristles, they're synthetic, of course, and they do come to a nice tip. But let me zoom in just so you can see the work. I want you to see, and I'll move my board so that you can see the area that I'm working on. I want you to watch what the pigment is willing to do here. Let me get the glare off if I can. Alright, so I'm dropping this orange into some sort of wet on wet areas, and so it is going to dilute when I put it in and move around, but I just want to watch just to see how it behaves. The nice point gives me the ability to really drop the color in, and then on some areas like here where it's white, I'm just going to try to get orange right onto the white paper. Maybe there's some little orange flowers living out here in our little area. That is really not, that's not bad coverage there. I'm going to zoom back out. Alright, so let's just keep watching and see what we might be able to do here. I've had no shedding with these brushes so far. I've been painting with them a little bit, and I'm not seeing any shedding. They do hold a nice point, and the smaller brushes, they are very, very tiny and are not the size brush that I would that I would normally paint with, but I'm sure that they would give you a nice point. But because they're so tiny, they're going to run out of pigment pretty quick, and you're always going to be back into your pigment dipping. So unless you're doing some really tiny, super tiny detail work, or calligraphy or something like that, they might not be the best. So just playing with this orange a little bit, just kind of making up some kind of landscape. I don't know. Let's see if I can. Just adding a little bit more water to this orange. I'm pleasantly surprised with the how well the orange is just really giving me some nice coverage. All right, just getting a few little speckles of wildflower kind of look happening here. Let me zoom back out just a little bit. I think I want to get into this yellow and maybe drop some of that, just the yellow, into the foreground here to cover up that white. This painting kind of just keeps evolving and turning into whatever as I'm going, which is usually the case with some sort of intuitive type thing. I'm not really looking at a reference photo. I'm just kind of playing. I think I will get some. I'm using this dark green. This green is really, it's really more of a teal. It's not, I would not say that it's, they're calling it, oh, I beg your pardon. This is not sap green. They're just calling it deep green. And it contains PG7, okay, which is phthalo green, and that's why we're getting that teal. So I grabbed the teal instead of the sap green, but that's okay. I'm mixing it with some of my burnt sienna over here, just to push that value down and push that green down just a little bit. And then just coming in here and adding a few more extra little values in here. And interestingly, it does come with a titanium white, which is really more, this is not a gouache, but it's like this, the equivalent to like a Chinese white. And so let's check the coverage on that. These are all non-toxic, by the way. It does say so on the labels. But let's get into this Chinese white. Okay, it's got a nice consistency. The brush fills up really nicely. I'm going to come in here and just give myself a few little speckles of white. And maybe a little bit more of the orange. Just right up here in the front where the scale would be a little bit bigger. All right, so let's let this dry and see what we've got. Okay, let's take a look at what we've got here after this has had some time to dry. I'm going to hold it up so that you can kind of see. We've got a lot of nice granulation and the, even a few little blooms in there. And I can tell that the texture of the paper itself lends itself really well to granulation and carries all of the little particulates into, and it settles in nice, very organic patterns. There's really actually not a pattern. I think that's what's so interesting about it. It's very organic, and you don't get these rows or diamonds or lines or anything else like that. It's just sort of this really natural, granulation sort of effect that happens.